So I'm here to talk about something that we're all after. It's that thing that drives us to do what we do. It's why we get up in the morning, and it's certainly what keeps me up late at night. Anyone who has ever tried to elevate the global human condition has spent countless hours, or for some of us, our entire lives have been spent chasing systemic change. I work in a food security sector in a world where, to this day, we still see hunger on every street corner in every city of every country. It is truly one of the world's largest and most persistent systemic issues. And there are thousands and thousands of us in Canada alone, all working towards one singular objective. And that is to ensure that no matter where you live or how much money you make, you'll always have access to healthy, affordable, culturally appropriate food. And we all have our own budgets, our own processes, and our own tools, all working to address this one wicked problem. And so the question has to become, why is it if we're expending an incredible amount of human and fiscal resources to achieve one objective that we have seen little traction and less progress? So when trying to answer this question, you have to take a step back and look at the process. What is it that we're doing, and why isn't it working? Social researchers out of Stanford University did exactly that. And interestingly, they found that it wasn't about what we were doing, it's about how we're doing it. They found that our entire humanitarian paradigm is based around one critical design flaw, and that is incentivizing isolated impact. Let me explain. I want to tell you Elijah's story. Elijah is a straight-A student in the inner city, top of his grade 6 class. And he was the kind of student that always showed up on time and was always happy to be there. One day, his grades started dropping and he started skipping classes. So his teacher reached out to his parents 4, 5, 6 times. They just never seemed to be home. And this is not an uncommon occurrence in the inner city school districts, so Elijah's teacher sat him down and asked him straight up, "What's going on, kiddo?" And he answered, to the best of his ability, what he thought the problem was. And he said, "I haven't been eating well, and I've been feeling sick." So Elijah's teacher enrolled him in the local nonprofit's healthy food program. So he got breakfasts, lunches, and snacks provided for him. Problem solved, right? Well, his grades continued to drop, and he started skipping more classes until one day he just eventually stopped showing up. He dropped out of grade 6. What Elijah's teacher couldn't possibly have known was that he needed so much more than healthy food. The community knew. Multiple service agencies in Elijah's community each had their own piece of his story. The family violence agencies knew that his father had a long history of domestic abuse for which his mom had reached out to them on several occasions for. The local hospital ward knew that his mom had recently given birth to a new baby, and Elijah's counselor knew that the responsibility for taking care of that baby when his parents weren't around fell far too often on him. The police knew that Elijah was picked up earlier that year for being drunk with his father and his father's friends, who happened to be members of the same gang. This is what isolated impact looks like. All of these service agencies at one point had made contact with this family that was in crisis and provided a service, but the lack of integration made it impossible to achieve the outcomes that they were striving for in isolation from one another. And the problem with isolated impact is that it scales up to the systemic level. And in our humanitarian paradigm, that starts with the funders. Funders who are trying to identify those organizations in their sector that will address a particular complex social problem while only looking at one piece of the puzzle. And in turn, those organizations are competing against one another by emphasizing how their individual activities are best positioned to produce the greatest impact, irrespective of the numerous other organizations that are working towards the same objectives and in all likelihood influencing the same outcomes. And so when you have a situation where isolated impact dominates the humanitarian paradigm, you need to really understand where the pieces fit together. And so enter the theory of collective impact systems. It's a concept that I've borrowed from the southern United States and in the education sector and implemented in the food security sector in northern Manitoba. And the adaptability of the framework is one of the main reasons why this idea we're sharing can help elevate the global human condition. It's Adaptability is driven by 3 preconditions and 5 structural elements. The first precondition is adequate resources. Now, I like this one because it's not exactly what you would think. The model isn't calling for additional funding or more resources to be deployed. Let's take Elijah's example. The agencies in the community were already providing those services, and it was just a matter of reorienting and coordinating the delivery in order to achieve the outcomes that they were striving for. The second precondition is urgency. This one is a little bit challenging because, as is the case in most northern remote communities, there are so many competing priorities, it's hard to rally around just one. But fortunately or unfortunately, the northern food security crisis had made international headlines when it was revealed that 1/4 of northern Indigenous children is considered severely food insecure. And nationally, Indigenous Canadians face hunger and malnutrition at a rate 4 times that of the national average. And in addition, Manitoba has the dubious honor of topping the charts of the highest incident rate of childhood obesity. In addition to these 3 preconditions, there are also 5 structural elements. The first of which is agreement on a shared vision for change. And that needs to include a common understanding of the problem and an agreed upon joint approach to solving the issue. And when you're working with such a diverse group of people, you have public, private, non-sector actors at the table, it's really hard. It's kind of like herding cats. And so you have to come up with systems to allow for open and honest and continuous communication. There was one story around our table where one of our more environmentally focused organizations was concerned that we were going to support projects where you harvest and hunt caribou for Indigenous traditional foods. You may not be aware, but the caribou herds in Manitoba are considered at risk because of the deleterious effects of climate change. And so there was a tension between needing to support traditional Indigenous cultural practices, but also needing to protect the precarious and dwindling caribou herds. Now, it was only resolved after hours of rich conversation back and forth, and that is the kind of investment you need into ensuring that all participants have a shared vision for change. The second element is, and this one's even harder, is a shared measurement system. And even though it is harder, it's absolutely critical to the success of the program. It's an iterative process, and we keep coming back to the table and making revisions as necessary, particularly as we run into problems with state bureaucracy and the numerous reporting requirements from all the people that sit around that table. But agreement on a common agenda is illusory if you don't have agreement on the ways that success will be measured and shared. Now, the third and fourth elements are by far the most time-consuming of the process, and that's because they involve developing trust among the people at the table. And like I mentioned, our collective impact system not only invites the public, the private, and the third sectors to the table. Importantly, we also have northern community residents. They are there to provide expertise in addition to spiritual and cultural guidance. That also brings to the table very deeply held mistrusts between the state and the communities. And so when we're working to address those mistrusts and develop the relationships around the table, you have to be pretty inventive. My favorite way that our system addresses this issue is we go on these week-long trips. We call them learning trips. We go to a remote northern community where 1 or 2 of our projects is located, and we spend an entire week with each other, engaged in reciprocal learning, learning from the communities, learning from one another, learning each other's stories, humanizing the whole process. And along the way, we share laughter, we share meals. You know, it's remarkable what sharing a meal with somebody can do. It's a beautiful practice, and it has this uncanny ability to erase power dynamics and foster open and continuous communication. We have been developing trust over food for years now. And finally, there is an easy trust among the group, a friendship or camaraderie that really enforces the work that we do. And lastly, none of this would be possible without the fifth element, and that is the backbone of the Collective Impact Initiative. It's a dedicated organization with a dedicated staff that has a very specific set of skills to facilitate the process of bringing all of these diverse interests to one table. It's a monumental undertaking, and The expectation that collaboration can occur without a supporting infrastructure is one of the reasons why collaborative efforts tend to fail. So our backbone is Julie Price of the Tides Canada Foundation. And she leads the initiative through ongoing facilitation, data collection, administration, the myriad of logistical details that go along with coordinating an entire sector. Without her, we would all have to be doing this on the side of our desks, and I'm sure you all know that that would be impossible. And I know it sounds like systemic change is, it's this big, monstrous thing where it's slower and messier work than funding a compelling grant request from one single organization. But systemic change requires a sustained campaign to increase the capacity and the coordination of an entire field. That's how we will see lasting change. And so, fellow changemakers, it really all comes down to this. If you too are working to make the impossible the inevitable, you would do well to remember the simple African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Thank you.